Hey, let's start the show.
For Thursday, November 19th, 2020. Welcome to This Is Only a Test, the official podcast of Tested.com. Welcome to the podcast. This week, we're actually recording a little bit early, so crossing my fingers that no news breaks or maybe YouTube doesn't go down in the middle of this recording as it did last week. We're recording on Tuesday, although you may be listening to this on Wednesday night or Thursday morning. But joining me for a Duocast, a rare Kishore and Norm Duocast, is Kishore Hari.
You just doomed us all. It's 2020. You can't say stuff like, if no news happens between now and then. I don't know what has happened in the last 48 hours, but I apologize for what Norm has wrought upon us.
I'm actually excited. I would welcome some breaking news, some crazy news, because not a ton has happened this week.
You and I, sir, live in different worlds because this week has been a lot of news in the world I live in.
In the world you live in, yes. So I'm going to reframe that. I don't want earth-shattering, democracy-breaking news in the world. I would like maybe some simple, tame product announcement news to come out, maybe between now. Not to say we have any information. I'm just saying it's been kind of a slow tech week. But it's good to have you on, Kishore. Jeremy couldn't make it this week, and you couldn't make it last week, so we're kind of missing each other. But it's, of course, we had to have you on customarily, but the week before Thanksgiving. So we absolutely will be talking about some Thanksgiving, Black Friday specific plans. I'm not having a Thanksgiving. Are you having a Thanksgiving? Kishore? Did I lose you? Oh no. That was amazing. People are going to have that left in. If you don't know what just happened, and I don't even know if there's going to be some type of sound cue, you're going to hear me talking. You've probably already heard me talking and then abruptly ask Kishore, did you freeze? What's going on? You saw like a confused look on my face. And what was going through my brain was, uh-oh, did my internet drop out? Because it's known to have happened. My internet has dropped out before while doing Zoom calls. But Kishore, it was on you. You had breaking news.
No. The power on my block went out. And I blame Norm and his tempting of fate of 2020. And so if my video drops again, don't worry. It's just the asteroid that somehow is targeted my house based off of Norm's angering of the 2020 gods.
Amazing. I don't even know where we were. I think we were talking about breaking news.
Let's just get into it because you guys were talking about the new ARM MacBooks with Will, and Will was the perfect person to have on last week because he's been predicting that for 6 years or something like that, that we'd get ARM-based Macs, and we finally got them. And today we finally got some benchmarks.
We
go to our top story.
Let's hit. Thank you for the queuing up of the music cue. Here we go.
Top story this week.
Shopping for new computers next week just got a little bit more exciting because not only do we have the pre-orders and the launches of the new Apple M1-based MacBook plus Mac Mini and the MacBook Pro 13-inch, but because, as you said, Kishore, the reviews are finally out, the question that we had from a technology standpoint, what this new ARM processor optimized for macOS, Big Sur, how it would perform. Could it fulfill the dual promises of one, better performance on native apps, and two, also much longer battery life, 18 to 20 hours of battery life on that MacBook Pro 13. We're not going to go into the specifics of the M1 like we did last week, but it is interesting. Kishore, you said before we started recording the first time, that now you're tempted.
I'm tempted for the first time in a long time. I know what Will said, don't buy first generation MacBook anything, for numerous reasons. But holy crap, these benchmark tests that came out today. I was reading one review where they looked at the MacBook Pro and they were doing like a simple like Xcode unzip. And they had it up against like an 8-core M1 against an i9, like a 2.4 gigahertz i9. And it beat it by double. Like so it unzipped in like 5 minutes and the i9 took like 13. The Verge did all these benchmarking tests using like real world stuff like Premiere and just hitting it with all sorts of applications, even like playing games. They were getting full day battery, like 8 to 10 hours of like, this is what my work looks like on a daily basis, like a million tabs open, Photoshop, Premiere, all those like resource hog programs going. And so the speed at which things are going and and the incredible battery life that they're getting out of this is
You said
incredible.
something really interesting there, and it bears repeating because you said all day battery life, and then you said 8 to 10 hours, which is what these reviewers have been getting, which is obviously much shorter of the quoted 18 to 20 hours of video playback that become the standard for the spec speak when Apple shepherds these devices out in a keynote or labels them on a sales page. And the same with performance. I think there's a kind of curve that we have to grade these things on. And in terms of performance, the surprising thing is that I think we all expected, coming from Apple and how much they've invested in this chip, undoubtedly things like web browsing, mail, video playback, the kind of things that if you're just a layperson buying a laptop and even doing some light, maybe music work or something like iMovie work, we would expect those to perform really well. Like Apple has now over a decade of working on their ARM chips, and a lot of the architecture and expertise, of course, goes over to the now the Mac side. That no one was surprised by. What was surprising was that, again, grading on the curve, things like Premiere work well, things like Xcode work really well, and real like labor intensive tasks. And you have native applications. They've been working very closely with Adobe, which has now put out beta versions, ARM versions of Photoshop in on the Mac Store and the Windows Store, even for the Surface Pro X. And so that was one surprising thing that it.
Yeah, I mean, this is like I get it's not all day as the way that, we've grown kind of jaded in describing what all day is. This is real day is what it is. It's like this is if you're hammering on your laptop and going through a full day of work, like an 8 to 10 hour day, and you're using just a bevy of apps, this is gonna make it through the day. How long that battery holds up, like we still have, we still have to see, but all indications are that out the gate this is a leap in performance of in battery life of almost like 2x versus a MacBook that
I
came out
always,
like
I mean,
6
it's
months ago.
funny because when we started talking about electric cars and the kind of battery drain, the worry we would have, of what was the phrase for it? But like, when we're driving an electric car, when Jeremy and I are in our cars and um, freaking out about how far we are from the nearest charger, right? That's a real concern. That's very different than someone with a gas car. But that kind of anxiety, I think, has always been felt with someone using a laptop for real productivity purposes, right? In the x86 world, unless you have a massive laptop with a 100 watt hour battery, near 100 watt hour battery, right? Even then, that laptop is probably made to be a productivity or gaming machine, and even then, at load, you're talking about 2 to 3 hours of real use. Battery, it almost becomes the backup. It becomes what you're using in between plugging it in when we traveled on an airplane, maybe at a conference, but even at places at conferences, you're mostly plugging it in. Even at home, most people are plugging it in. The paradigm shift here is the question is, has it reached that point in mobile battery life where it can be more like a phone? Plenty of people don't charge their phones until they go to bed, right? That's the all day battery life that it took us a while to get
It,
to. Have we reached that?
isn't that the promise of ARM going to Macs anyways. Like, first of all, we'd get all the iOS integration now, and you'd have the seamless experience of what you had on your tablet and your phone show up in your laptop. Now, if you have the experience of the hardware being very similar in terms of like how you charge it, how you experience it, the I think I think The Verge called it a triumph. Like, I'm feeling swayed. I would say like the thing that gives me the pause is like we live in this virtual time period. For them to have that crappy webcam is just it's unreasonable why they have the crappy 720p webcam in there, especially at a high end product like this. And the other thing that I've heard about, and I know it's early, is that iOS kind of integration is not good, partially because there's so many iOS apps that are just built for touch, and you don't have a touch screen here. But I also think that's not a war that I'm going to win anytime soon with Apple. Like, touchscreen is not coming to these MacBooks, and I think that might limit the utility of some of this iOS integration that we're
On the
seeing.
meta level, that is the debate. We talked about it last week. I think Will, Jeremy, and I are in the camp that we believe it's going to come in some form. I don't know if that means a change of physical form factor for the MacBooks, or whether they can do it across all the lines. And obviously, if whenever they do it, the messaging would be they found a way. They found there's something that they didn't that made it possible now. But in all the interviews they've been playing it coy and saying that at least Mac OS Big Sur was not designed with any touch considerations in mind, even though there are a lot of pointer click. If you look at the code and look at how developers are tapping and creating their apps, the guidance is that things are the clickable areas are bigger now, and certainly the icons are more spaced out. Uh, I'm not in good.
I I was just gonna say, like, I think it's also an engineering feat to have a fanless laptop like this at scale. I'm sure the commenters will be able to point me to other fanless laptops that might be out there, but this, I think that's a non-trivial thing that we've just gotten accustomed to over years of having PCs. Just how loud those devices actually are, and all of a sudden we have an absolutely stone cold silent device now. And I think that's going to be a huge attractant, relative on the scale. It's much less than the performance and the battery life and all those other things we've talked about. But I think it's a non-trivial one that's not getting enough talk here. Not having a fan in there is a great innovation for laptops
Yeah,
going
and
forward.
you know, I think Windows users and Microsoft fans will quickly point to the Surface Pro X, which came out last year and didn't wasn't released a big fanfare. It was more of like the oddball product in the Surface lineup because it ran Windows on ARM. And if you look at the pricing for Surface Pro X and how interesting where it's positioned, it, it, it's so different compared to how Apple's launching their chips. Microsoft didn't do. There's some custom stuff there that they work with. I think with Qualcomm for um, the SQ1 processor, but it was basically it wasn't a wholehearted transition, right? It was like, okay, we made Windows on ARM, we have Android apps running here, if and now we're going to give you an ARM-based version of a Windows laptop, much like one of the very first Surfaces. They had ARM versions. This is like this Pro X is a callback to that, but premium design, with a long battery life, performance-wise compromised because of the app compatibility stuff. Um, but also expensive. While on the Mac side, they are just seamlessly transitioning, not even like calling out that this is an ARM-based MacBook. It's just the MacBook Air. That's the only MacBook Air you can get.
Well,
And if you want to have the MacBook Pro 13-inch with the long battery life, all-day battery life, that's the one you get.
expensive was already part of the brand, so that wasn't a shift there. The thing about the Surface Pro that you're talking about is like within a week of it coming out, there's all sorts of stories about bugs and issues with like software having problems. We're seeing none of that in the early reviews. So either Apple just nailed it, and all the things that Will brought up last week of reasons why you wouldn't buy a first generation MacBook with a new processor, because you're going to get all of those weird ports and issues and bugs that happen when you have a new processor. They haven't shown up yet. That isn't to say they're not coming in the coming weeks, but Apple's avoided that early on. That makes this a big deal, because if you couldn't run Premiere without some bugs, or if people are having problems with Photoshop, or video editing, or like anything, we're not hearing any of that at this point. Um, and I think that's just a huge testament
There's
to
also
the
a different
launch of
angle
this.
to consider when you're talking about the don't buy first gen Apple products ethos. There's the position that Will's coming from, an analogy he used to the Apple Watch was that the first gen, and you can even make the argument with the first iPhone, is that the first gen was so quickly eclipsed and made obsolete by the second gen when they ramped up production, when they ramped up the expertise, the fact that they didn't have to build a whole new platform, they were then started iterating. The 3G and the iPhone 4, much better buys, and for a lot of people, those are their first iPhones. Same with the Apple Watch, the Series Zero, so expensive. The question here, I don't think that these MacBooks are going to be made obsolete, and the question really is, looking at the technology, what does the ramp up look like, and will the performance gains as the M series chips mature, as M2 comes out, whatever it is next year, will it be that much better in terms of performance, maybe not battery life, because I think the Apple style is establish a battery life for a line of products and then ramp up performance and maybe shrink the size or form factor or whatever, the power to go alongside that. Will next year's MacBooks make this year's feel less less of a good buy, even though this year's it has, I think, exceeded expectations in terms of a first generation ARM based MacBook.
I don't know where they're going to get that extra battery performance bump that they got from this year. Really, if you're looking, and this is early, if you're looking at what feels obsolete, it's like the i7s and i9s that were in the MacBook Pros a couple of weeks ago. Those are the things that feel obsolete right now. So I totally understand where a lot of people come from about that first gen Apple product ethos, but this might be an exception, at least early on. Again, we should all necessary caveats. We
Yeah.
should wait.
I don't think from a
But
manufacturing standpoint they're going to go lower than 5 nanometer anytime soon. Like, this is the process they're on. It's such a huge jump. It's AMD's only closest rival in the CPU space here. I can see that the integrated memory, because it is shared, all system on the die, on the GPU and CPU all
Yeah.
share the same memory. You get benefits of that, but it's limited to 16 gigs right now on the Pro systems. And I could see, as they really start supplanting and getting and phasing out Intel, and you seeing what the MacBook Pro 15-inch with the associated price and expectations of that caliber and price of machine, what a $2,000, $3,000 MacBook Pro running ARM looks like. There's got to be 32 gig, 64 gig memory options, and also what the the ecosystem of applications look like going forward, right? Obviously, the Adobes and the of the world are already porting over to ARM, and they're going to make the machines of today, the M1s of today, are going to benefit from all of that expanding ecosystem.
100%. I fully accept M2 whenever it comes out a year, 18 months from now. Everything is going to mostly be about the software that gets like matured between then, and then they'll put in a 1080p webcam, and people will be like, "Oh my goodness, finally!" And that'll
World of
be it.
Warcraft Blizzard is the only other launch partner for natively run apps on ARM. Everything else runs through Rosetta 2, which I guess is also a testament to the compatibility there. May not give you as much battery life as running through that layer, but I think the people who really lost out, people who bought MacBooks again last week or last month, and maybe last holiday season, if you splurged on a MacBook Air, that's looking a little bit like a regretful purchase unless you needed it. But you know what? You got through 2020 using that computer, and that's, if there was any year to really leverage use of the laptop at home, it's been 2020. All right, let's move on to our next segment. Ooh, a few things. I think I'm gonna make a tradition for the next 5 weeks for us to start off with some Mando talk. Mando talk.
Absolutely. I I get that it's not everyone's cup of tea, but
Yeah.
inject it straight in my
Oh
veins.
my god.
This is
Okay.
great.
Um, I think you listened to the conversation that we had, that I and Jeremy and Will had last week. Would you agree, if you go back 1 week, that the second episode really brought it in terms of the effects, brought it in terms of the creature design, felt high production?
I 2 weeks ago I was saying that I wasn't into this
That's
monster of
right.
the week, and then immediately got a monster of the week episode, and I flipped. I really enjoyed episode 2. I like it felt like it did what great sci-fi westerns of the past have done, like Firefly, where they take you to another world, they'll let you explore. It's not meant to necessarily do anything that furthers huge plot lines, but you see more development of the main characters. Yes, we didn't get a 10 out of Baby Yoda, but we got Baby Yoda comic relief, but we saw Mando more under pressure. And for the first time, I think in a long time, we saw Mando
Yeah.
up
Oh yeah.
against it,
When
like
they were
with no
swarmed,
answers,
yeah, by the
right?
creatures, like there
And
was no way. It felt terrifying. It was one of those. It felt perilous,
mm,
and the resolve of it felt satisfyingly unresolved, if you know what I mean, right? Like it wasn't a
yeah,
reset by the end of the episode. It left things open, and also, they survived. Obviously, that's not a big spoiler, but they're not in
yeah,
that same state. And then this third episode continued right into that.
yeah. Yeah, and I'll say, like, even though we've gotten a lot of fan service in these episodes, a lot of callbacks, especially to Clone Wars and Rebels and other things, it doesn't feel like I'm getting beaten
Mm.
over the head with it. Where they're like, "Look at this fan thing," and like they just show it to me as much as they did in episode 1. Um, Dave Filoni in episode 2 was great. I love the utilization of him in that role. But episode 3 is like more like meat and potatoes. Like now we're furthering the story. We're calling back to season 1. We're pushing some elements. I could do without anyone threatening Baby Yoda anymore. Any sea creatures trying to
R.I.P.
eat the
Pram,
child.
Space Pram.
Baby uh yeah, Baby Yoda must be protected at all costs. I have one
Spoiler alert
question.
on.
Was that
Spoiler
Frank?
again. Spoiler light is
Uh
on. Next 5 minutes.
a friend of what friend of tested? Was
Apparently,
that
yeah.
Frank?
According to his Twitter and Instagram, Frank Thingergy did the Mon Calamari mask, and they did a great job because those weren't puppeted eyes, and so they were static eyes, but they still gave enough personality and life to those characters, background and foreground. And apparently, it was Frank Ippolito as the dock worker, not his voice, I believe, but the sweater wearing, the casual knitwear Mon Calamari, which people are already debating. Aren't they cold blooded? They live in water. They need sweaters. Doesn't matter. It's Star Wars. It's fantasy. They're sublight speed going from planet to planet. Deal with it.
Yeah, I'm completely fine with everything that we saw there. Um, I love the lived-in universe. Like we got a fishing village. I feel like that adds to like the Star Wars lore. We're used to seeing we got Forest Moon, we got Cold Planet, and we got Tropical Jungle. Now we have something new, and I actually really enjoy going somewhere different. I would say the only thing about this episode that I found a little wasted is like the Empire
Titus Welliver,
leader. What's his name? He's such a
the
yeah,
Man in Black.
Titus Welliver. I feel like he he did not get much room to be the Titus
Yeah,
Welliver that
yeah,
we
I
know
agree.
and
I
love.
agree with that. We're going to full spoilers now. This one tightly woven in, even written by John Favreau, but you could see the Dave Filoni influences here, especially with the Bo-Katan and the new Mandalorians from Clone Wars. I watched this as someone who did not watch Clone Wars and had to do the Wikipedia research afterward, but still felt super satisfying because you could immediately tell these three Mandos have a different philosophy. They have a history behind them. They fought with more confidence. Like when they were raiding the ship, they were just marching down those corridors, blasting those stormtroopers like a tight knit squad. And Mando, even though he had his hero moment at the end, he was behind them. Right, he was a little bit of a more of a scrappy gunslinger.
I I I loved how so much character development happened for Mandalorian in like a couple sentences where Bo-Katan talked about like the religious sect that he's part of and how much that just like transformed who he was, who has been this loner this whole time, to being
Right,
lonely now. Like that he's off on his own. Even his own people aren't the
right.
people he thought they were. And I thought that was a great subtle transformation that's going to play out in episodes to come. And so even though he's found his people, they aren't his people. He's still the outsider, which I think allows them to explore things in interesting ways. And then we got everything. If you watch Clone Wars, we got such a payoff with the one Katie Sackhoff line calling back
Yeah,
to the dark saber, which is where it was left at the end of Clone Wars, is that Bo-Katan had
right,
the
right.
dark
And
saber.
I love that when she said, "This is the way," it was a Creed burn. She subverted his line. Yeah, and brought it back. Brought it back. They got their symbolic fist bump
Mhm.
at the end. One more shout out, directed by Bryce Dallas Howard, and people on Twitter have pointed out that the opening scene of the Razor Crest descending onto the planet in flames was almost shot for shot, paying homage to Apollo 13 and the reentry scene that, of course, her father directed. So I'm glad they brought her back as a director.
Yeah, you can see on Twitter some side by side shots of those scenes, and I initially was like, "Really?" And then you look at them side by side, and
Yeah.
they are
Oh
exactly
yeah.
the same. It's
All right, turning
incredible
off the spoiler
homage.
light. Two more bits of Disney Plus news. First off, WandaVision, the first Marvel MCU Disney Plus show, is now pushed to January or mid-January launch. I think they have a mid-January 15th date now. Um, I'm fine waiting. I mean, Soul is going to tie me over, I think, in terms of Disney Plus content.
It, it, it's not really pushed back that much. And in fact, this is like the kind of opposite order that we initially expected. We expected Falcon and Winter Soldier to come out first. I
Yeah.
think it was supposed to be before the pandemic, sometime like August. It was supposed to come out. And obviously that got pushed back because it has much more of a different shooting style and schedule and needs. I'm excited to get back into a Marvel world because um I think things are going to come fast. Like as we kind of exit the pandemic next year, all of a sudden there's going to be this bash of films that hit theaters. So I think this is hitting like a good sweet spot in those few months before any of that stuff really happens and kind of starts building up that Marvel train again. I've like totally lost any context or train of thought around what this new Marvel 2.0 universe is going to be about. So I'm excited what they're going to do, and this show is going to be weird, and
Yeah,
that's what
yeah.
I'm
The
excited about.
the eras that they tap into, the who knows it's going to tie in to Doctor Strange. Interesting that they can be on separate tracks as Falcon Winter Soldier and swap. So what is the Disney Plus TV show equivalent of the post credit scene for a TV show? Don't know. Very excited to find out all these things come the new year. Speaking of Soul and Pixar, though, there's a new Disney Plus short documentary series about Pixar Animation Studios. It's their theme. The first theme is inspiration, and it's a profiles on, I believe, 6 employees at Pixar who work in different departments, from writing to character design to music, I believe, and story, and giving you insights into films like Soul coming out, into past films like Incredibles, and then also the film I think they've announced now, Luca, which is coming out after that as well. Wonderful, charming look at the people who work at Pixar, and it really, I think, got me excited for Soul specifically. And really bummed out that it's not going to be in theaters. I'm happy to watch it at home. It's a movie I really feel like I deserve to be seen in theaters. I really wish I could see it in theaters. And crossing fingers that Wonder Woman 1984 is not going to go, 2 weeks in theaters and then HBO Max, which is the current rumor. Speaking of home theatrical experiences, I think there is still time, maybe, but when you're listening to this, to take part in the NYC Virtual Film Festival and buy a ticket to rent a screening of In and of Itself, the Derek Delgadio show performed in New York that we've gushed about. Kishore, you and I both rented this the day it came out and watched it over the weekend. I don't want to go into spoilers, but I do want to ask you.
I don't even know how do you
There's so many
spoil that
ways to
show.
talk about the trick
I
specifically.
mean, you can, there's things you can say, but it's a
Yes.
very personal show, so it's hard to spoil because it means different things to different people.
Absolutely. I think the thing that we can say is that for a show that was meant to be seen in person in a small theater with a couple hundred people, it's 2 hours, 6 tricks. They found a way to encapsulate much of that experience successfully in film form that feels both like a representation of that show as well as a more personal documentary about his life. So it's not a documentary format. It's a film, it's
Yeah.
a show film, but done in a way that is less like the Netflix comedy special, magic special, where you're just watching straight through. And there are cuts between the different performances, which I think are used to really good effect here.
Yeah, and I'll say I think this is my favorite piece of theater I've seen in the last 10 years. It was the most moving, touching, different piece of theater I saw. And I know I'm raising expectations. This did not live up to the in theater experience. I don't know how you could. But it was close. It was closer than I thought it would. And like seeing um there was famous people in the audience that you see as cameos. That's funny. My friend Kate, Adam, and I have a mutual friend that was shown in this documentary. It's incredible to see uh, uh, what felt like this incredible production, but to have it feel so intimate.
The recommendation that
Still,
we would have given people
love it.
when they would have seen the show in person, which is to go there, be honest and earnest, and put away your cynicism for 2 hours and be truthful to yourself, which is part of the kind of the show experience. I think that same recommendation applies for people watching this. And if you watch this film with that type of mindset, I think it will impact you more and you will feel more. And I certainly cried while watching it. So yeah, it's coming out on Hulu early next year, and hopefully have a chance to pick either Derek Delgadio or Frank Oz's brain on this. Frank Oz directed the film as well.
And I don't know if I told this, but when I saw it in person, Frank Oz was like sitting 2 people over from me,
Yoda!
just watching the show, and I was just sitting there, and I'm like, I like turned somewhere in the middle of the show because I almost needed like a break from what was happening, and I turned, and I'm like, that can't be Frank Oz, and then like towards the end of the show, I'm like,
That's Frank Oz.
that's Frank Oz. It was, I mean, because Frank Oz is giant.
Well, he's a larger than life
tall man, and like yeah, exactly. And it was very clear.
Very cool. Last bit of pop culture is for those of you following new Lego sets. They are churning these out, obviously, for the holidays. Lego Ecto 1, $200, not $300. That's on sale now on Lego.com. I have not pulled the trigger on that yet. Still thinking about it. It looks beautiful, though. 18-inch long. Larger than mini scale Fig Ecto 1. But they also announced their largest set ever. So previously Taj Mahal, largest set ever, then beaten a couple years ago by the Millennium Falcon, UCS, which is still available, $800. And now the Lego Colosseum at 9,000 pieces.
I'm not excited about this, only because the Colosseum's a repetitive.
So I
thing.
think I've read some of the reviews, and I think that the people have said they've done their best in both the color differentiation in terms of the way you build this oval to make it interesting and not repetitive. But you're right, it is going to be less of an interesting build because you're not building recognizable, different parts of a thing, right? You're building pillars of a Colosseum, and it's architecture, and it's $550 at 9,000 pieces is so many. That's crazy, and it's so big too. I think the whole thing dimensionally is like 2 feet wide. Like I don't know where you
Yeah.
would put it, right? 24-inch deep by 20
I
by 10 inches high. That's a massive, massive.
what when I built the Taj Mahal, I didn't know what to do with it. Like, and I built it by myself. It took like a
Yeah,
week for that
yeah,
many pieces. I mean, I wasn't like going like gung ho about it. I was doing it over like a holiday break, but this is an intense build. 9,000 pieces. That is a
yeah, and
massively
and
intense build.
also like it's not the same as a pop culture build. It's architecture. It's yes, it's this wonder of the world, but it's not
Mhm.
something that people may unless you live in live in Italy have this resonance with in the same way that you would a Batmobile or a Ghostbusters Ecto one. But 9,000 pieces, and yeah, not for me, um, but it's gonna be out there. All right, moving on to technology.
Technology news.
We're going to keep it rather short this week, but talk a little bit about Black Friday. Now, I know Black Friday has changed for you, Kishore. Obviously, 2020 makes it very different. But even I think last year you were less excited about Black Friday and what it meant. Is that feeling echoed this year as well?
So I have strange feelings about it this year. So I mean, obviously, given the situation here in the U.S., you can't really go to stores. The pandemic is kind of raging everywhere. So Black Friday is going to be more online than it ever has been before. But given the state of how things are going, retailers are more, I would say, almost desperate for sales bumps in this period than they have before. So I think there's actually going to be a wider range of deals and opportunities than what you've seen in years past, where they're specifically making like almost like lower end kind of stuff to offload during Black Friday. I still think that's going to be the case, but I think you're going to see some deals, especially from smaller retailers, on stuff that you haven't seen before. So I actually think I'm interested in this year's Black Friday, but I don't have a big purchase to make, because the thing I was most interested in as a big purchase was a console, and I can't
Yeah,
get a console. Forget that. Like that's
right.
not a thing that's in there. And the other big purchase I had was a 3080, and I got it,
Ooh.
beforehand. So at this point, I'm not looking for big ticket items, but I do think there's going to be some interesting stuff out there. I'm definitely heavily investing in games this time around. So I'm going in on the Miles Morales game. I'm going to get the PS4 version because I don't have a PS5 yet. And then there's a new Zelda game. It's a hack and slash game, Hyrule Warriors, that's actually out this Friday. And I just Breath of the Wild was my favorite game on Switch, and it might be my favorite game of this decade. And so I'm excited to get more of that backstory filled in, and I think it's probably going to be a bridge to Breath of the Wild too, even though the gameplay is completely different, all that kind of stuff. So that's I think that's where I'm heading towards, and I think somewhere late one night I'm just gonna break down and buy the Quest 2. It's
Yeah,
just gonna happen.
embrace
I'm
it.
just like I'm opening
Yes,
myself up to it.
let it go over you, especially with all the content coming out for it. And they're in stock. If you can't buy an Xbox Series X or S, if you can't buy a PS5, no one can get a PS5 these days. $300 for a Quest 2 isn't a bad buy, and you can play Population One with me and Jeremy. He's not on the podcast, but I will call him out and
Mhm.
say he pinged to ask if I would play Population One with him later this evening, and I said no. I'm recording the podcast that you should be on. No, I didn't say that. He's working. He's actually working right now. Uh, but I'm gonna try deal hunting for um, present for my parents. I'm looking for a new Dyson. That's the technology that they could use, and those are typically very expensive, so they do get slash in prices. And then I'll probably do some PC upgrades. I'll probably get not more RAM because I'm already at 64 gigs, but storage like some a nice Samsung drive or a
I
SSD.
I Yeah, I think SSD is I think is a good time to get an SSD. I'm nervous for a lot of retailers. I think that a lot of retailers, like, this has been a tough year for them, and they're going to be riding the razor's edge here. So I actually hope people, if they're able, actually spend some money, especially keep some of those smaller retailers afloat, because Amazon's going to do fine, especially with a fully online Black Friday. So I'm not worried about the big boys like that, but the smaller retailers where I'm going to try to put
And then
some of my
oftentimes,
resources.
the thing you buy for the holiday season, the thing you want to do things with. And I think it's probably a really great year for people to start looking into 3D printers if they don't have one yet. And, my eyes really got opened up to the world of mSLA printers this year. I did a review of the Anycubic Mono X, and I'm reviewing the Elegoo Mars 2 Pro right now. And so look for that in a couple weeks. But, for $300 or less, you can get a really high quality mSLA printer that can, that if you want to spend some money on some miniatures, some wargaming tabletop miniatures, you could spend all holiday season printing those. Back some Patreons, buy some on my minifig, my mini factory, and support 3D modelers and get something cool that you can paint and have something tangible. That's my recommendation. Yeah.
For the first time, I actually regret having a smaller print bed. I have a Prusa i3 MK3S, like, which is awesome. Like, it's a perfect printer for me. I don't use it enough, but because I just don't get many print failures. It just, like, stuff works, and it's hard to argue with a 3D printer that works. But everyone in my feed is printing Mando helmets right now, and the Prusa is just a little bit too small for a full size Mando helmet, and you can make some really good ones. And I think I actually think this is the perfect moment of our lifetimes to be a 3D printer. Where are you gonna? You have nothing but
Yep,
time,
that's
and
it.
you're at
That's
home.
that's the thing.
That's
Yep,
that's
yep.
3D printing.
Yeah, to be 3D printer owner, and yes, the resin ones require a little more workflow. In fact, what we have now is an interview that I did with our very own Darrell Maloney, the Broken Nerd, who has so much experience with 3D printers, both FDM and SLA. And this is an interview that I conducted with him as a part of my Mono X review. Is going to be as kind of a FAQ section in that, but didn't make the cut because that ended up going really long. So I thought it'd be a great time in this podcast to throw it in here. So without further ado, the framing of this is I was having a overnight massive print going on in the background. You can't hear it, but while that print was going on, I got Darrell on the line to pick his brain about the ins and outs and tips and tricks with mSLA 3D printing. Let's take a listen. All right, so Darrell, thank you so much for getting on the line, and I've been waiting for this conversation for a long time because I have so many questions for you about this.
Awesome. So
and-
before we even get started, are you having fun with the printer? How are you enjoying it?
I'm having so much fun, and in fact, I'm having fun with parts of the whole workflow and process that I didn't even realize I would enjoy. It's
Gotcha.
like the whole. It's not like, yes, the prints look beautiful, and it's really great to have something come out of a printer, and it's like, wow, this nice, beautiful object that it almost looks cast. Like it doesn't
Yeah.
have like the kind of print line qualities that I was used to with FDM prints,
Yep.
but things like setting up the printer, all the preparation work, that workflow, I'm really enjoying that part. And like setting up a print, a long, 10-hour, 12-hour print before going to bed, and then waking up next morning, it's like Christmas morning every time, checking
Yep.
in on it and
Yeah.
making sure, did the first couple of layers stick? Did the supports work? It's a surprise every time almost.
Yeah, it is. And then being able to have that quality print, and you can almost just take it straight to paint after you clean it up a little bit, and it's a really nice process. And I think resin printing is gonna be the next thing.
It really feels more accessible these
Yeah.
days. And I remember a couple years ago, back when it was just laser-based ones with a form, or
Yeah.
even DLP ones, and they were really big. Either the platforms were a little small, or there just wasn't enough supply of resins or materials, and there were a couple crowdfunding campaigns for really small ones. But now it's affordable. A couple
Yep.
$100 will get you a
Yep.
really good size. SLA printer,
Yep.
and the fears that I had going into it in terms of the consumables, where he's talking about the LCD screen being something you'll eventually replace, or the FEP film. Like, I've been printing liters and liters of this, and everything looks good. There's not cloudy on the film. The print quality has been, as long as I do the maintenance of clearing out my IPA and stuff. So that's why I wanted to kind of pick your brain about, like, what are your kind of best practices in your workflow, because you do really big prints with your Peopoly and the printers you use, and how do you avoid that disappointment of having like things stick to the print or the wrong place, or a support fail? What do you do?
So I make sure that, so kind of best practice is to manually put your supports in. I think a lot of people allow the program to do their supports, which is not bad, but I tend to manually do them. So this way I know where I'm putting the supports at. So this way I know I'm getting it in areas where it'll be easier to clean and it's the best place for that support to be at. And then the other thing that I do is I make sure that my prints are at certain angles, that they're printing at certain angles. So like 45-degree angle. I've been printing some things here lately. I've been experimenting with a 30-degree angle, and I've been finding I've been getting a lot cleaner prints versus the 45. It kind of just depends on the actual part that you're printing. But I just been messing around with different angles. And then again, it comes down to how much space you have on your bed as well. So you maybe have something that takes up the bedroom, and you don't have the ability to, turn it 45 degrees because it may come off or it's maybe too big for your bed. Right. And then I also make sure that I'm cleaning my vat in between prints. This is probably not best practice, but sometimes I do leave the resin sitting in there for a day or two. And if I do that, I make sure that I clean out the vat thoroughly before I actually start another print.
And that means you're actually pouring it back in, filtering it into another jar or something, and then scrubbing it clean. I find that that's the place where, because I'm in such a rush to maybe start another print, it's so exciting. So when you're letting one print soak, to just, this next print's going to take 4 hours. I want to start one right away. It's a really easy step to skip. And I have had, the failed prints I've realized, either I'm not cleaning out the vat, or I'm not cleaning out the IPA, and then it can ruin something that you invest 6 hours in.
Yeah, and what kind of got me away from doing that is having a failed print. A failed print in resin printing is pretty expensive. You're talking about, you're paying for resin. Even though it's more accessible, the resin is still not as cheap. It's not cheap on the market. The prices are coming down, but it's still expensive. And to have a failed print, this versus a FDM print, the resin print is more expensive. So I tend to be on the safe side and clean out the vat, make sure my supports are straight before I start. And I've had very, very, very few failures with the resin printers.
When you say manually adding the supports, do you start with like an auto generate and then tweak from there, or do you really go from scratch?
Sometimes I do. Sometimes I do start with an auto generate, but then sometimes I will go in, especially if it's a smaller piece with more detail, I'll go in and put the supports in myself.
And it's just from your experience, like where you identify the places they're going to have overhangs. I know some of the slicers or some of the programs identify, okay, this shaded area is where it thinks you'll need supports. Yep. And then, do you find that on a smaller print, if I'm doing something that's only a couple inches tall, like I overdid the supports here because I didn't want it to fail. Yeah. But I don't know, is that like, where do you find that's too much or too little? And do you err on just having more?
I always put more. Just because I don't want a failed print. I make sure that I have more supports than I need. So I'll put extra supports in areas where I think they need it at. I've seen some people do some crazy prints with very little supports, and you can get away with it, but it's risky. So I tend to, caution on the safe side and make sure that it has enough supports and that it's sticking to the bed.
And then in removing the supports, that post-processing workflow, I've read different takes on some people like removing the supports before they do their soak and cure
Yeah.
because it's easier. Or some people will say, don't try to mess with it. Soak it, get it all rinsed out, dry it, cure it, then snip them off. What do you
Yeah.
think?
Me personally, I take them off before I put it in the cure box. It's just easier. For me, it's really just I have my supports, especially for the Phenom L. They're very thin at the top, so they literally just peel. I could just peel them off,
Right.
and I tend to do that with all my prints. For me, it's a little harder to clean it off once it's cured and everything. Some people think it's easier after it's cured. I guess it's personal preference.
Yeah. Yeah. And I find don't skimp on the gloves. Buy
Buy
lots
gloves.
of gloves. You're gonna go through pairs and
Yep.
pairs. I'm and the times where I'm peeling off the supports, it's just easy to hold it and then just kind of tear it off
Yep.
and it falls off when it's not fully cured yet before going through that UV pass.
Yep.
It's really really easy that way. And then the actual exposure times, the setting, I know the different resins, there's so many resins out there these days, right? The
Yep.
fast setting ones, there's the stuff that's you can clean with water. There's so many ones. The people who make the resins usually put out a guide for the exposure time, the kind of the speed and lowering speed. Do you usually stick to those, or do you add extra time and slow things down just for extra buffer?
I usually start off with what the manufacturer recommends. And a company like Sierra Tech, they have their recommendations for all their resins, and they're pulling from a pool of people that have experience, settings and with different printers. So they have a good guide on their website that they post. So I start off there, and then I kind of tweak if I have a problem. So one of the resins that I use from them, I didn't even have to tweak any of my settings. It just worked perfectly because they had it matched up for the printer that I'm using. But it's always, you can always start off with their recommended settings and then kind of tweak from there where you need to kind of adjust.
And then the actual cleaning process, IPA is your pick as well. I've been using 99% and
Yep.
it's working for me, but I know there are a lot of third-party aftermarket products like Simple Green that are meant for cleaning these type of prints, or some people use soap and water. What's your experience?
So my cleaning process, I use the isopropyl alcohol, 99%. Usually when I get my prints off and take off all the supports, I give it a nice bath in the alcohol, and then I will take it out. And then I'll actually do a rinse in water and soap, and then put it back into another cleaner wash of the isopropyl alcohol, then dry everything off. And then if I still feel it's a little kind of sticky or tacky, I'll give it one more rinse in water and soap, dry everything off, and then it's right into the UV box for curing.
Yeah, and from the experience I've had with using and testing this printer, it's patience is the thing that I'm always fighting against. I'm so impatient in wanting to get things rinsed and then to the UV box to have it finish, quote unquote, right? But actually letting it dry between that last pass before putting UV box, so you don't have that kind of shininess and the kind of tackiness, I feel like is also really important.
Because if it's not cleaned thoroughly, you'll know it'll have that tacky feeling. I've had prints that I haven't cleaned off thoroughly or I haven't let cured thoroughly, and they'll have that tackiness on it. And that's something you don't want. And if you do get it, you can always just re-rinse it and then put it back in the UV box.
Awesome. I mean, it's the lab work that I find is so fun, and I'm in the forums and on the subreddits, kind of just sharing the notes and reading how other people's experience, and it really feels like it's not only accessible, but there's a great community out there of people sharing, and it can be different for everyone's situations, like temperature and how long your resins have been out, and so many different options. It really is neat.
And another thing,
as a process.
and another thing to take into consideration is the protection as well, making sure that your area where you have your printers are well ventilated. You're wearing, gloves while you're handling the prints and the resin. I usually sometimes I wear a mask now when I'm dealing with the resins and when I'm cleaning up. I've even moved over to a respirator when I'm working with this stuff. So just making sure that your area. I have a dedicated area for my resin printers, and that's where all the resin stays at. It doesn't travel any further outside of that area. So I tend to keep that area just for resin only. So this way I know it's contained to that area if I do have a spill or anything like that. Because again, we're dealing with liquid, it's gonna happen. You may have a spill, and you kind of don't want that stuff, in an area where you have either kids or animals or something like that at.
Yeah, sometimes it'll drip and fall on the floor, and you just
Yeah.
won't remember that it's there because it's just so runny, but that is toxic stuff when it's not fully cured. Are you keeping like your resin? Do you usually stay with one type of resin for a long time, or do you kind of swap between as you empty out and clear your vat and just have lots of like half liter or quarter liter jars of stuff laying around that you can try to get through and cycle through?
Yeah, so I usually print with one type of resin, but I have, so it depends on the project. So like with the Aquaman project, I know I wanted to have that as clear, printed in clear, so I bought some clear resin for that one. But I usually print in Sierra Tex Fast Gray. I like that resin, it works really well. It shows up a lot of, I get the detail that I want, and I can see what with the clear, when you pull it off the printer, it's kind of hard to make out the details and everything came out. With the gray, you can actually see all the detail, and I can see what came out, what didn't come out. So I tend to use that. And then I have bottles that I'm looking at, boxes of, so I'm just trying to use it up. And then filling up the printers as they're running. So I have a print running right now. So I'll monitor this print, but I'll make sure I have enough in the vat. So let's say I'm off at work, I know I can kind of gauge, okay, I have enough to last until I get home, and then I'll recheck it and then fill up as I need as I go.
In your experience, the pausing, taking off the shroud, refilling, that's not been a problem for you, resuming, like it's pretty seamless, literally?
And honestly, I don't even pause my prints. So when doing that, you may see maybe like a darker line. So if you have a print that you're probably just wanting to present, or let's say you're not doing any post-processing on it, you may see a line from you pouring in the resin without pausing it. But I post-process all my prints anyway, so it doesn't really make a difference. But I'll pour right in as it's printing, but I'll make sure that it's up off the vat. So I'll pour in between lifts and then pour the resin in. I don't know if that makes a difference, but I've seen that it's kind of helped with decreasing that deep line, because I can kind of tell, especially if I'm have a different color. So I print with black sometimes as well, and you'll see the distinctive line of where and when I poured that resin in to refill the vat.
Oh, that's so interesting. I've seen some people do some crazy, like changing up their resins, different translucents, mid pour on a really tall print, and you get this built into the print, a transition, a gradient.
I have one too. I won't get it, but for the base that I did for the Thanos Infinity Gauntlet, I was running out of gray resin, and I ended up pouring in some translucent black, and you can see the transition from the gray and it's cool looking, but again, I post-process my stuff, so it doesn't really hold any weight for me. But I know some people that, and probably enjoy that.
Yeah. And then one final question I want to pick your brain about is the line height, because like the printer like the Model X, you can go down to 0.01 millimeter, which is it's gonna take 5 times as long or more than if you go at 0.05, the standard. And I kind of settled in as that 0.05 is great for so much stuff, and if I want that real fine extra detail, maybe I'll go half that, 0.025 or something. But it's really, is it diminishing returns that you find as well?
I haven't really seen a big difference. I've been printing at 0.03 on the Elgu, and I've printed some things on the Phenom at 0.05, and really haven't seen, and to be honest with you, I've seen more detail come off the 0.05 off the Phenom than I did off the Elgu. So I don't know if it's maybe something in my settings that I need to change, or maybe something that I'm doing wrong. I'm not sure, but I tend to stay with the 0.05. It's done. I've been able to capture like ton of detail, and plus that I print pretty big stuff, but even down to smaller things, I've been able to capture some pretty good detail with the 0.05, and I think that's pretty standard. But again, the Mono X, you have the mono screen on that, so it may be
so fast.
Yeah.
You get 1.5 second exposure times. It's like 3 times or 4 times as fast. And play it safe, I can go 1.8 or 2, but that's still relatively really fast. But I think what you're speaking about, it speaks to the point of line thickness isn't everything. Back when FDM printers, like thinner lines, thinner layers, but it's also like the physics of
Yep.
your rise time, your dip time, how long it's staying out of the vat, when
Yep.
you pour that extra resin in, all those like real like actual analog physical properties of the resin itself, temperature included, can affect the quality of the print. I like that kind of like the variability, because it's fun to tinker with it and experiment and tune your settings perfectly.
And like I said, even the angles that you put it on can affect the quality of the print, because you can put something straight up and have a bunch of print lines. Put it on an angle and have no print lines. So it's, again, a lot of things come into play. It's not just plug the USB stick in and hit print and you're good to go. There's a lot of things you got to take into account when you're resin printing.
Yeah, it is. To your first question, it's so much fun. It's like it's fun having this cool stuff and the great repository of models that modelers like you and other folks put up on online. But just going through that and having it in the background, while it's like, it feels like multitasking. I'm working on a print here, and then I'm working on a video edit here, and it's very, very satisfying, rewarding. Well, Darrell, thank you so much for jumping in and giving me some tips here. I hope people out there find it useful as well. And then we're going to go check back in on this print. Thanks,
awesome.
Darrell.
Thank you. You're welcome.
All right. Hope you all enjoyed that conversation with Darrell. And if you want to hear more kind of interviews in this podcast, it's something we've been tinkering with and thinking about, let me know. There are plenty of interesting people who want to chat with that may not make for great standalone videos, but we can always pop in the podcast here. But without further ado, since we have Kishore here this week, let's get to a moment of science.
Now it's time for a moment of science.
We started talking off the top about how this wasn't that newsworthy of week for Norm. I think I was rocked to the core in science world in terms of the news this week. And we're going to talk about the vaccines, and I'm going to take us on a deep dive here. I never thought we would see the kinds of results we saw this week, with all necessary caveats that we have a lot more data to see, a lot more papers, a lot more time with these vaccines. I never thought that we would see a vaccine developed in 11 months versus like the 4 to 5 years it typically takes. The efficacy numbers that are being reported for the Moderna
for both Pfizer
vaccine
and Moderna, right?
And the Moderna, they blow things out of the water. And like a normal flu vaccine has a typical like 60% vaccine efficacy. We're talking about like 90-95%. And it's all using a new technology that we've never really built vaccines at scale before with. So I sit here again with all necessary caveats, just like sort of rocked to my core. For as dark as this year has been, the science made incremental progress and has opened a window for not only us here in the US to exit this next year, but for us to control this worldwide. It's going to take continued efforts, but I'm going to go into the science. Do you have a question before I get going, though?
Yeah, the science is what I want to ask about. Like, what was it about the approach or these multiple companies are taking? It was about the actual testing that yielded these numbers. Because if you're talking about something like the flu vaccine, where 60% plus efficacy rate, but something that companies have worked for decades on, what about the approach here, or COVID specifically, made this possible?
Yeah, so let's back up and talk about like the baseline science. So we're talking about an mRNA vaccine, a messenger RNA vaccine. So most vaccines that we get use inactivated viruses as part of their vaccine. So you get injected with a piece of a vaccine that either can't replicate or really can't grow into the same sort of kind of effect as its normal counterpart, and then your body reacts and forms antibodies for that and offers you some protection. This was going a different way by injecting messenger RNA, which essentially is a DNA encodes instructions into an RNA snippet, and that RNA translates those instructions into developing a protein. And so what they do is they take this RNA snippet, that encodes for a piece of the protein of the spike that you see on a coronavirus. So those spikes that like shoot off that we all see in those diagrams, it makes that spike. And what happens when they inject this into your body? It goes inside your cells and replicates, and then all of a sudden your immune system comes around and sees like, that's not human, that's bad, I'm going to start producing antibodies to deal with that. And then your whole body is flooded with these antibodies that are resistant to this spike on the coronavirus. Now that messenger RNA vaccine, it just makes the protein inside the cell, so it's not even injecting you with the virus as with other vaccines in the past. So this technology is a very different form, and what we're seeing is the initial data that's come back has shown that the antibodies are persisting in people for a long period of time at higher levels than the people that have gotten coronavirus and COVID and recovered from it. So, like, if
Mm.
you got COVID, you're going to develop antibodies that make you somewhat resistant to reinfection. Out of like millions of cases, we only know about 200 people that have gotten reinfected. And it's because you've built up some immunity in the process of getting sick, that's providing you protection. We're seeing, at least in this early data, that the what's called the titers, the things that we're sort of measuring antibody performance against, are persisting at much higher levels for those that have gotten the vaccine than those that naturally got COVID. So I should talk about how the trial was done. So Pfizer enrolled 44,000 people. They split the groups into two. Half of them got the placebo, just basically a saline injection. Half got the vaccine. What they saw was essentially only a handful of people in the in the vaccine group have gotten sick with COVID, like a very small number, and that there's people in the placebo group that have gotten COVID. And so, comparing those differences, they could see that there is an efficacy to the vaccine because naturally people in both of those groups are encountering the virus in their normal daily life. And so, what they initial trial design was for about 30,000 people, and they're looking for 36 what's called events where people would have contracted the virus in that placebo group. They worked with the FDA and raised that up to a target in the low 90s and met that threshold, and they're going to continue the trial until they hit 150. Now there's so much virus circulating in the country right now that they've hit these numbers quicker than they ever imagined, because there's so much virus circulating that people in the placebo groups are just getting sick quicker. So now, like, they got this data ramped up really, really quickly. So all of a sudden, they're seeing this differences between the two, and they can compare them very quickly. And none of that data, by the way, is actually controlled by the vaccine manufacturer. It goes to an independent review board made of academic scientists, scientists from the CDC, scientists from the FDA, and they review this data, and it's only them that see the unblinded data. They're the only ones that actually know who got the placebo and who got the actual vaccine. And so from that, they're able to calculate what the efficacy rate is. Now, there's still questions about what it means long term. Does it mean efficacy at preventing you from getting sick, preventing you from getting severely sick, like going into the hospital, preventing you from getting, potentially reinfected? I think we see early signs of data that will persist, and you'll have protection for a period of time. All that is going to come with longer periods of time. So they're going to be running these trials for um, uh, through the end of November, but also continuing on to monitor these individuals. But things are very positive. I'm not sure that I believe like the 90%, 95% number is going to hold exactly. It might come down as more data comes through, but it's not going to go down to like 50%, which was the minimum threshold that the FDA had to even consider a vaccine to be approved next year.
Now, when you're talking about just two companies so far have made this announcement and more testing to be done, the point where a decision is made by the FDA to allow distribution, obviously to frontline workers and the high risk patients and the public first, how is it determined which company gets to deploy? And what's the logistical infrastructure for that when you're reading about so much still in development?
So what they do is once they complete the trial, once they hit enough of these events where people have gotten COVID in the placebo group, they can trigger a review at this independent review board. And the review board will have a meeting where they go over the data in detail and look at it. And the company then can apply for what's called emergency use authorization, where they have to come and say, we want to use this vaccine in this specific population of people for X period of time. So it's this really narrow thing. And everyone's expecting the emergency use authorization will be requested for healthcare workers. So, like ER docs, nurses, people that work in hospitals that are highly exposed, and then probably a separate or an additional EUA for high risk individuals, elderly individuals in nursing homes and whatnot. So both of those companies are, after their trials are completed, have to go submit for that. That'll happen sometime in early December. They both manufactured vaccine ahead of time. So they've built
Mm.
tens of millions of doses on the bet that what they would do would work. So
Wow.
these are both 2-dose vaccines. The Pfizer one has to go through cold chain, meaning it has to be stored at a cold temperature from manufacturer to 24 hours before injection. It has to be stored at minus 80 degrees Celsius. The Moderna one's a little less cold, minus 20 C. And the reason for that is these vaccines have like different sort of like booster elements that induce an immune response when they're injected in you, and keeping it cold prevents like bacteria and other agents getting in there, which is a risk that comes with any cold chain vaccines is getting contamination in there that can cause a reaction. So like companies like UPS have built facilities that are just, it's a warehouse full of negative 80-degree freezers. The military is handling the distribution here in the U.S., where they're going to be, transporting from the manufacturing site through to the end-use hospitals. So there's a massive distribution element that's here, and it's hard. We've never had to do it at this level, and we've never had to do it in the midst of a handoff between administrations who have the authority around this. So I think all of that's going to be really complicated. But early in January, I expect to see doses being delivered into healthcare workers. And what's going to happen is when we go from like 30, 40,000 people in these clinical trials to a million, 2 million healthcare workers, we're probably going to see some adverse events happen. It's just part of like the statistics. If you inject a couple million people with a placebo, somebody's going to get sick. Now the question is like, are they getting sick because of your injection, or are they just getting sick because they were just getting sick with something? It's bound to happen. And so our test here is in early January and February, we're going to be put through the test of probably pushing past a lot of information that comes at us that is going to make us question how effective these vaccines are,
Yeah.
because we're going to get reports of people having events and reactions, and we're just going to have to kind of start to prepare mentally for that. And the experience of that rollout, both the distribution, the logistics of that, and the experience of these health workers getting it, I think is going to go a long way to kind of predict our future. But for most of us, we're not going to see this vaccine until end of spring, middle of summer is when I think it'll start to get rolled out to a majority of us as the distribution systems get put in place, as the manufacturer ramps up. And I think a critical thing is using that time between now and then to build confidence in a system, both in the logistics of it, in the transparency of the data, in the providers that are giving it, uh, because this is a really personal thing. Like anyone that has a kid knows how tough it is to watch your kid get vaccines. It's like an emotional, hard experience. Put that on another level in the context of what we're going through. So start preparing yourselves mentally for what that experience is going to be like. And we have a lot to learn in the next few months about that, because the more people we're able to vaccinate over the coming months, the quicker that we'll be able to bring this to an end. Now,
I mean,
there's this. Yeah, go ahead.
I would go one extra step and say, like, it's not just the mental preparation, which is like, I hear everything you're saying, and I take solace in that the science is sound, and that's the news and the science is so good that we're already preparing for the irrational, you know, feedback and the social implications of this type of distribution that obviously the logistics have to take into account because we are not a society of completely rational people, and it is something that we contend with on a day-to-day basis with masks and also with other types of vaccines. But the fact that it's feels like it's right around the corner does not mean that we take our foot off the gas in terms of precautions, and it makes it even more imperative that in these, the holiday season of cold weather and of in normal times, social gatherings and family gatherings, that it's just completely needless death can be avoided by common sense and just holding tight.
Yeah. Over these last few months, I have very intentionally avoided what is commonly referred to in science communication as appeal to fear, and appeal to like an authority driving fear. Because I don't think it's terribly useful, and there's not a lot of good evidence that actually helps people make better decisions. But I'm going to do it once right now. We are entering the most dangerous period of the pandemic here in the United States. The next 8 weeks are by far, by all the numbers, by all the activities, by how this virus spreads, which is indoors, um, more easily. This is the most dangerous time. Scientists have been saying it from the start, and it's happening. So take care of yourselves. Make good decisions, not only for yourself, but for the people that you might come in contact with who might not be in as good health and might be in greater danger of getting really sick from this. And all of those people that you can't see that they might come in contact with beyond that. And that's really hard to do. It goes against um, a lot of American values of thinking about things as a rugged individual, or even thinking about just your sort of nuclear family or even your local community. You have to think bigger, and that's one of the biggest challenges of this entire pandemic. Is it has, especially in Western nations, is it goes against some of the ingrained thinking. It exploits weaknesses that we have in our society and the ways we sort of view others. So make good choices. You don't need to hear from me what those choices are. You've been hearing it for everywhere. If you're one of those people that's like, should I wash my hands at this point? Like you've all heard the messages. Make good choices, especially going into Thanksgiving. I'm having Thanksgiving over Zoom. I am using the opportunity to cook a prime rib and make the exact Thanksgiving meal that I would have. No compromises because I don't have to deal with any family members like being like, no, I like my potatoes this way. Like I'm
More leftovers for yourself.
I get to do it my way, and I'm really excited about that. But to track back to the science for a second, I think I said in early March on this podcast, like prepare for disruptions to your life because they're coming, and you could see them clearly. This is the first time I'm going to say this. Prepare for in maybe 6 to 9 months, give or take, that life starts to look like how it was. It'll be different. It'll always be different. I think there's going to be an element of mask wearing and hand washing and collective behavior that takes time to come back. But I expect to see a movie in a theater before the end of the summer of 2021. I might be wrong in that. I'm not telling people to go right now. I see a lot of reason for optimism. We just have a cold, dark winter to get through right now. And I think we can do it. And I am forever grateful for the work that scientists did over this last year, sharing data, working in ways they've never worked before to develop this treatment. All along, our best fight against us was our collective behavior. But scientists have come through on the other side, and we're about to see the fruition of that work. And it's humbling to know that there is, hundreds of thousands of people working on behalf, not just us here in the U.S., but around the world to quash this disease. And we have a real opportunity to do so, and do so based on some early data. in a way that will crush this disease next year, because we're seeing some, again, early signs that immunity is going to last, both from these vaccines and from people that have had the disease.
And we may be 1 week before Thanksgiving, but I am thankful for the scientists, the frontline workers, the doctors, and for you, the science communicators, sure, for guiding us through this. We're not out of it yet, but I think Jeremy's going to be bummed he missed out on hearing what you just said. And I'm going to encourage him to listen to this episode, which I know he never does, because he'll want to hear what you just said. I think that's a good place as any to wrap up. We're not going to do a full VR minute, but if you want VR news, Quest 2 now has 90 hertz native out of beta. Quest Link is out of beta, 90 hertz as well. And Half-Life Alyx, perfect time to play it if you haven't yet, or perfect time to revisit it now that Valve has released over 3 hours of developer commentary in-game. You can play through the game, put on those virtual headsets, listen to the dulcet tones of Valve employees recording commentary in their homes. Super insightful stuff. I've been playing it on my playing through Half-Life Alyx again while testing and reviewing the HP Reverb G2, the review for which you should see in the next few days. And also, if you're listening to this on Thursday, Tales from the Galaxy's Edge, the next game from ILM X Lab set in the Star Wars universe, that's also coming out. So lots of good stuff coming out in VR. I'm not sure we're going to have a full episode next week ahead of Thanksgiving. Who knows? We'll play it by ear. But we do have an outro this week. Before we sign off, though, thank you, Kishore, for joining me. Hope you and yours have a safe and wonderful next couple weeks if we don't get to see you. But we do have an outro from Great Job. And here it goes.
Hi there, I didn't see you. That's it. Picard has a variant, which I was very fond of growing up as a kid, which is the vest version of that. I like that vest.
When does Picard wear that vest?
When the Borg attack.
Oh.
In First Contact.
Like he sheds to show the guns.
Oh yeah.
A little bit. Yeah, I mean he has it on when he's like on the tube surviving all the goo that's like
those are his
dissolving all the
muscles.
bones.
Those are his real
Picard
muscles. Yes.
Perfect. All right. See you all next week.